Cześć kochani, witam Was bardzo serdecznie w naszym słuchowisku, gdzie, jak mam nadzieję, historie opowiedziane przez bohaterów audycji będą dla Was jakiegoś rodzaju inspiracją. Dziś, po wstępie, jako że mamy gościa z zagranicy, w audycji właściwej przeskoczymy na język angielski. Tak, żeby nie przedłużać, zapraszam Was do wstępu, a później do właściwej audycji. To jest punkt zwrotny. Gościem dzisiejszej audycji jest
Mike Parsons. So, welcome everyone one more time in the audience. I'm here with Mike. And before we enter the Q&A session, I would like to ask you to sit down if you have chance in open position. It is do not cross your legs, your arms. If you have chance, close your eyes and focus on breath. Now inhale, hold for a while, and exhale. One more time. Inhale, hold for a while, and exhale. And now, still having eyes closed, think of the garden. Imagine yourself being in the garden. What is the first thing you see? Is it a plant, a tree, a house? What is there? See it carefully. Describe it in your mind. And keep this image, because this might be your question, what it is representing to you. Whatever appeared in this garden, take it as you would pick a flower and embrace. Now one more time. Inhale, hold for a while, and exhale. Open your eyes. So, Mike, coming with the question.
Yes. Who's in the
What
garden?
was or what is the turning point in your life?
Okay. As soon as you started describing, the garden, and to be honest, I'm feeling pretty anxious actually sitting here. My heart is racing for a number of reasons, not necessarily because the situation's dangerous to so to speak, but yeah. But who was in my garden? I sort of had a vague picture of a garden, and then immediately I was like, right, let's stick Marcus Aurelius in there right now. So to immediately jump to to the turning point of and initially I said to you I wanted to talk specifically about Diogenes because he's quite literally a barrel of laughs just talking about some of the more crazy stuff that he's done. But yeah, I just came away from that taxi ride listening again to one version of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and particularly as of July of this year. So it's been about 3 months where I've dabbled with philosophy in education and such, and coming at sort of philosophy from as somebody who is graduated as a politician, basically, so as a politics major. So I've dabbled with philosophy for a number of years, and then finally something just clicked in my head in July where it just started to make sense, and I was like, oh yeah, there is something here. Like this does have almost that sort of like religious like experience of like, say, somebody turning to Christ and such. And I'm listening in this case specifically. I started with Seneca as a recommendation from somebody on YouTube. And I was just like, yeah, if you want to just listen to, if you want to read a life-changing book, And yeah, here's Seneca's Letters to a Stoic. And then I just went into it. I was like, oh, do I have to do this again and go through this whole? And then it just clicked. I was like, I hear myself, even though it's somebody from basically more than 2,000 years ago. I really, really hear myself, and a lot of the problems that, whether it's whatever level of society that you're in, whether, you know, a big fan of Jim Carrey and he's describing, you know, wealth and such, and money means nothing, and then, you know, still came out of it all being one of the biggest movie stars ever, literally wrote himself a check for $10 million on which he cashed out to himself, and which he signed it on a particular date, and he had already smashed that date and was pretty much the biggest Hollywood star of the 90s as a very, very young individual. And still, so again, so many of like super, super successful individuals, against, like, for me, they didn't have the answer either. And like, thankfully, many of those like celebrities and people that we sort of idolize and look up to, they will happily tell you. And Jim Carrey, again, is a great example of like, yeah, money means nothing, possessions mean nothing, and then finally, here come the Stoics.
Basically, this is very good that you touch the topic of, let's say, Hollywood, because I wanted to ask you. You mentioned philosophy, that was kind of turning point in your life.
Yeah.
I will touch two topics. First, this will be very abstractive because it will be related to philosophy, but combining the Eastern philosophy, as we are in China, and Western. And second question, we will start from second, because that was very good. You touched topic with Jim Carrey.
Okay.
Also touching that you have your own path to become musician. How do you perceive not only idols, so-called, but people who go Hollywood, who go to this mass media with music? How you, as a musician, as an artist, perceive going there? What is the greatest change those people pass by? Because there are also people who've been, let's say, normal people without this nepotism. So they didn't have to pass from father or grandfather, let's say, being in Hollywood, but they somehow came there. And what, in your perception, makes people change there?
Yeah. Again, I think it's just such a difficult question, because again, like, I've achieved a level of success, whatever you define as success. I've achieved a level of personal success that I'm okay with and I'm happy with. Looking again, borrow an example from Jonah Hill. Again, similar story to Jim Carrey, where Jonah Hill, in this case, quite a vulnerable individual, has been very open about him being bullied and such all the way through middle school, high school, and then pretty much became that character of the sort of fat, nerdy guy in the films, and has since then, that image has otherwise catapulted him again into success, and which he was massively insecure about. And again, he's been a great film Stutz. So this is where I'm getting it from. If you the film Stutz, where basically he's in like an open dialogue pretty much with his therapist, and he's very open about the pressures and the relationship that he had with his mother, very, very vicious ideas that he had, you know, the image of himself and such. So things to sort of keep and build are, again, to tie back to the Stoics, of you have to build. So thank you again for the meditation. You have to develop this sense, because it's not something you just have immediately. You have to develop this, you know, this inner fortress, or in your case, the garden. What's in your garden? Okay, not simply just, okay, think about a garden. Why do you have the garden in the first place? What's the garden for? Who's in it? What's in it? Why are they there? It's a bloody difficult skill, and it's particularly difficult for me when, you know, I'm thinking and overthinking far too much. So I think, you know, modern mindfulness is the perfect thing. You know, this practice of meditation is the perfect thing for me. But sometimes I can't shut the brain up. I can't just focus. I don't focus. So certainly yeah, that really hard skill of just even sometimes simply just going back to simple mantra of just go to the garden. There, you're sitting with Marcus Aurelius and you're enjoying, I don't know, enjoying some nice water from the river and such. You're enjoying water from the fountains. I don't know, you're having some wine. It's that skill of just building a healthy story, I suppose, that's actually accurate and reflective of who you are. And then, I suppose, the great celebrities, the great individuals of our time, Jim Carrey again, he's again very explicit about it, where like he just basically had an idea, had a little vision of, right, I'm going to write myself a check for this amount of money on this date, and then he did it. And then he did it, and it's how did he do that? That's obviously the difficult part. But otherwise, having all I suppose, to break it down as really, really simple as possible, he had an idea, and it was probably a pretty healthy idea. And good job, to those people, all of those people, have had some sort of goal or dream, and then they've gone ahead and they've actually done it.
And the second question matching to this, because he mentions first Marcus Aurelius and second Seneca, it will be a very twisting question. Do you believe past lives?
Past lives.
Like, do you, let's say, have this concept in your mind that you could have been, let's say, in Rome or somewhere, that these feelings are very familiar to you, that now you read it, it's like, oh, I know it.
Okay, I'd answer this maybe more like a slightly scientific way, where I'd say, okay, maybe I don't specifically believe, like, okay, was I whichever person in ancient Rome? Like, no. Do I have, in this case, I'm 25%, I'm quarter Italian, so I most certainly have, again, this is again why I love the Stoics and, the Roman Greco culture so much, is because, well, I have a direct connection by blood to this. And again, being a foreigner here, quite isolated here in China, that's motivated me to reach out for this connection. But again, borrowing the biologist's response, I have a genetic link to those people. But do I, say like that's more, I suppose, slightly more like kind of like a Hindu or like a Buddhist idea, borrowing from sort of like Eastern philosophy, like that, I would question a little bit. I think it's an interesting idea. Show me some empirical evidence that is the case.
Actually, I can now ask you, have you ever met a concept of Akashic records? Like, do you know chakras? Like,
the chakras.
And besides 7 chakras that are basic one, we have also the 8. It is Akashic record, chakra.
Okay.
People in audience, you cannot see, but I just point around 30 centimeters around above our head.
Okay.
There is a chakra called Akashic record, and this is when you do meditation, like the longer one, and you ask specifically, like, now you have 25% blood from Italy. Is it also connected that in past lives I've been, let's say, Italian, Rome?
Okay.
And now it's somehow my soul chose this specific family to experience very similar, maybe not life, but thoughts.
Again, I could ask the same thing of my British heritage, as actually, well, shouldn't I have a stronger pull to British culture if this is the case, as I'm more British? Say this exactly the same thoughts. I'm going to borrow a little bit of, say, Jungian archetypes, borrow a little bit of like Jordan Peterson here, a little bit of like Richard Dawkins here when I say this, and like, well, there's Nova, what's his name? He's an Israeli academic that's gotten quite famous at the moment for, again, he's a very charismatic individual, and he's coming at it as basically as a historian, and say this in the same way that, say, you walk past like a convenience store, at which there's basically convenience stores on pretty much every street in China, and you're otherwise bombarded with an aisle of goods that are just supercharged with sugar and salt and fat, and like all of these things are extremely rare, in our historical environment. But otherwise, our palates, looking for high calorie foods, because food was much more scarce and harder to come by. So therefore, evolutionarily, we've adapted to crave to crave these foods because, well, they're high calorie, they give us a lot of energy. But otherwise, we're still functioning on this, I suppose, to use like, the analogy of like a computer, we're functioning on this quite outdated hardware versus our modern life, which is in the 21st century. But otherwise, we're still functioning on hardware that's more than 10,000 years old. So we're basically in this environment, which is, and otherwise the response to crave it, much like, say even a monkey, like in the forest, you come across like this absolute treasure trove of stuff. And of course the impulse is to gorge because, well, where else are you going to find this? But otherwise, that little treasure hole basically of food is now everywhere that you can go to, like pretty much in most if not all countries, even coming from slightly poorer countries like Kazakhstan. Like, it's everywhere, and it's extraordinarily cheap. It's extremely cheap to eat in most countries, to be honest, now, even with the smallest amount of money. So, like, do I have, say, exactly the same thoughts as those people? No, maybe not. But do I share the same genetics? Probably very closely. So why is it that I have these similar thoughts? Well, I think, the genetic answer and the historical answer.
And that will be a curiosity for me to ask, did you have any sharing from your family with this Italian side? Because, of course, when you are Great Britain, you are grown in Great Britain, you have like 100%. But did you have any, let's say, values or some knowledge of history from that side of family?
Ooh.
Or it was not?
Oh, that's a difficult one. That's immediately touching on the very very poor relations of my family, and this again is another reason for why is it that I am being driven to reach out for this connection. And it's the very poor relations that I have, particularly with my dad. So my dad is was my grandmother. So my grandmother is obviously Italian, so Italian plus English granddad, and then we get to my dad, who's half Italian, half English, and then we get to me, 25%. So unfortunately, no. And this is why I've spent a significant portion of my life now, especially my adult life, is otherwise challenging the story that I've been told from my parents, and that was, Carla this and that, and like she was such a terrible person, and like she didn't care for me and whatever. And it's like, well, and as an adult now, okay, you can go ahead and have that story for yourself. That's a horribly toxic view to have of somebody quite controversial, like, say, a Trump. And it's like, well, certainly I dislike those sorts of individuals. I find it amusing the way that he does stuff and the way that, say, he conducts himself in politics. But like, I wouldn't say like I hate anybody. I'd be doing a disservice to myself, and I'd be doing a disservice to the people who otherwise I truly idolize, to say like, oh yes, this person, yes, just absolutely hate them.
We actually, since beginning, you kind of mentioned the idealization. Like, coming back again a little bit to the question I related to ask your feeling about the Hollywood and like also kind of this artistic world. How do you feel yourself as a musician? Where do you feel yourself more, like doing music and being successful in States, or rather staying with music in UK or maybe China, because now you live in China?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the difficulty with my music is, I think it would be much more aimed. Well, first of all, I'm coming from a Western background, so this music is very much aimed at, aimed at West. It's going to be more receptive for Western people, where people are familiar with this kind of music, and simply I've been brought up on that kind of music. And you don't have to go very far listen to the music that I listen to, and otherwise, basically, you're familiar with the stuff that's going on in that history of music, and then to then hear that replicated and in turn sort of recycled, in a way. But if you're completely unfamiliar with it, like in the same way that you're, let's say, chicken feet, if you're completely unfamiliar with eating different kinds of, say, organs and such, which are very, very common here, which, again, not uncommon for people during World War II, so a shared history there. We call it offal in the UK. People ate that stuff all the time. And now suddenly 20, 30 years later, offal is otherwise off the table, and nobody wants to touch it. So a chicken feet, not the most visually appealing thing to eat, and generally it's a thing that people don't like. But again, it's just when you've been socialized and when you've been brought up, and you've experienced that thing on a day-by-day basis, and you've got people around you saying, "Oh, this is delicious. This is delicious." In the same way that the same is true for music, where it's a good friend or something like in middle school or high school who introduces you to some band, like, say, my dad really loved The Who, for example. It's just like, wow, what's this? This is me. This is me. Basically, it's that little path of self-discovery, basically. When obviously you're an adult and you've got that sort of clear conception of who you are, and then suddenly, chicken feet. Yes.
But then you would see yourself much more in the UK or in the US with being successful.
I think I would see. I don't think there are certainly people here who would be ready. I think who'd be interested in listening to this music, but I think the general populace, they're still very much. I sort of have this image in my head. It's not an accurate or defined number, but it's like basically being in the 1960s. It's the 1960s culture where, like, my wife at the moment, and especially her generation, they're coming to kind of accept slightly more liberal ideas, and they're doing their own form of freedom of expression, in basically coming from Chinese socialism.
Yeah.
But I'm quite thankful that China's here where it's at, and sometimes it's a little bit frustrating when, like, you're trying to have like a slightly more difficult conversation about art and something, especially when something is very abstract and interpretive, and in many cases, like, I find, like, especially sometimes with my wife, she's looking at something, say, at like the first or the second level, say, but maybe not, say, like the third or whatever, however many levels of interpretation there might be. And so, like, that's not a problem, but it's like, people who are sort of familiar and, like, have, I guess, been educated in sort of reading that sort of, like, sub-layer, or whatever you want to call it, meta-narrative. People who are familiar with that already and they've been conditioned, and okay, fine, indoctrinated, I'll use that word, because we've got our own form of indoctrination as well, and propaganda. We've been indoctrinated otherwise to read things in that way as well. And maybe it is just the first layer of logic of...
Maybe about a little bit story of album. The audience, you cannot see now, I held in my hands the debuting album, In the Desert.
In the Desert, yeah.
And it includes 6 songs, which are very deep with lyrics, and also the power of music, because Mike, we didn't spoke it yet, but he is playing metal music. And what was first, inspiration?
Wow.
Second, this can be a little bit spoiler for the audience, but I just noticed, I don't know if it was intended or was it actually noticed by you?
That's not intended. Not intended at all, but I'm intrigued. I'm very interested when you say that. So, okay, the end of the album is a little bit disconnected, actually. It ends with the song Polluted.
Yeah.
It ends with the song Polluted, and okay, when I tell you when I made that song 6 months into arriving into China, and you can begin to, like, probably guess, why is it that he's wrote a song called Polluted? And of course, why is it that I wrote a song and you're laughing there? Why are you laughing? It's riddled with propaganda, and yes, you're all indoctrinated sheep.
But being like serious, what actually these songs are about? Like, what the lyrics? If this is something that you can share, like what it's about?
So again, so go back a little bit to Polluted and sort of start there. So Polluted was came from sort of quite a deep place of hope, actually. So the original songs, so the first 5, and again the album's not actually finished. There's one song which is actually missing from there. The missing song is Into the Void, which again. So I originally wrote these 7. At least I was 23. I was 22. I think I was 22 when I originally started writing them, and then sort of had most of those songs finished by the time I was like 23. I'd dropped out of either I'd already dropped out for the first time. Basically, I dropped out of university. I was just in a very, very deep place of dissonance. So observing the dissonance, and coming from psychology, basically. So learned psychology at high school. So that was why I was borrowing some of that stuff. And so observing the dissonance, pretty much every line of that song is commenting on my development and also my family developing as well. So for example, there's one line which hits particularly hard. You're a neurotic child. You're a neurotic child, if I can even remember my own lyrics. I try. So again, it's very painful for me to go back and listen to these songs. Yeah. It's like I'm listening to Whitney Houston at the moment. You know?
I mean, that's why I ask kind of with the song, because also for the audience, if you are related to bands like Metallica specifically or System of a Down, this is a kind of vibe of the album of Mike. So when you are listening, you can feel the lyrics, what are about. But that's why also I asked, because what is great for not all people, it is obvious to talk with musicians, especially from metal.
Okay.
And I want a kind of show to the audience the backstage of writing lyrics specifically for metal songs.
Yeah, so again, asking about the inspiration and say, like, what's the process? So the process is nobody, I suppose, can really articulate the process, and there's vague words, I suppose, for that you can otherwise describe, but otherwise, I've said this again to my wife, actually, for my writing, for my new writing at the moment. Like, there's not a particular word. Like, the words come later. I suppose it's because I grew up playing video games. I was probably like 4 or 5 years old, I think, when I got when my parents got the PlayStation 1. And it's been a long, basically pretty much almost my entire development up until like 30, 31, where otherwise I've pretty much almost entirely quit video games and have no interest in going to video games. And so, and from video games you go to movies and such. Like, there's so much content that I have observed and watched has been highly visual. So the way my brain works at the moment, when I'm trying to express a creative idea, there's more a film. It's more like a film that's going on in my head, and then the words come afterwards, sort of describing what's in my head. Much like, say, I don't know, flipping Moses. Moses, like the revealing of the flipping burning bush and such. Like, it's this grand, quite insane image, basically, that's going on in my head. But for observing the dissonance specifically, it was just thinking to images of like my mom, particularly. It's just difficult to go there.
It's okay. It's okay.
But it's mom continually, and as I'm saying this right now, I am 100% sure she is still in bed. Just mom basically in bed, and especially as a young child. And it's like you want, and I mean, I knew Mum before the bipolar, basically, and there was a lot of love, a huge amount of love that was shared and felt. But then, as soon as the mental health stuff happened,
Mm.
And just, yeah, I became extraordinarily isolated, and I completely lost that parental love. So yeah, observing the distance, yeah, and all that frustration and pain of wanting to have that parental love and acceptance, and just to have it all just basically taken away, I suppose, because of, simple way of putting it, taken away because of this condition, bipolar disorder.
Mm.
And then basically that song is, just the whole album pretty much is still just me reaching out for that parental connection. Yeah, again, going back to reverberating back on that one line, you're a neurotic child, wasting your days away. If only she may return. But you never changed. In this case, I'm talking to myself. You never changed. Always clinging to an idea, to a fantasy, basically, which otherwise is unattainable. And again, this is where philosophy comes in. This is where, again, thanks to people like Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, help a little bit. You cannot choose the parents. You cannot choose your parents, but you can choose the child that you want to be. And when he said that to me, I absolutely just burst into tears. And finally, somebody just basically just took that scratching record, that little needle, and just lifted it off that broken record, basically, that little broken piece in my mind that I'd just been going over and over and over again for however long it had been. All the times, like, those people had said, just be yourself and be the person that you want to be, and it's just like, no. But basically, I wanted to say a lot of very, very nasty words to people, for people who came along to me and used that modern language of, oh, be yourself, and like, you're an independent, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, go away with your modern Hollywood nonsense. That's basically American self-help. I want to kick you in the face.
Mm.
But then finally, yeah, okay, I'm not alone here when literally people from 2,000 years ago or whatever saying pretty much the same things, and I just feel the same sentiments. It's like, yeah, I get it now. This is, it does make sense. It's not a bunch of liars basically in America, trying to get every little quick buck or whatever, and just here's self-help book number 2. Oh, here's number 3, like all your childhood trauma fixed in 10 pages or whatever. Finally it just clicked.
We actually probably talked some time ago about inner child, and this is also for you, the audience, if this is your first time listening to the podcast and you probably never met with topic of inner child, just not to talk about widely what is it, the method. This is your version of since you've been in the womb of your mom until yesterday. So all this period of life, this is you, and this is your inner child. And to help yourself the best, of course, after therapies and after a lot of talks with friends, with family, with whoever you can trust, and you can share your experience. The last topic you have to do is to sit yourself with your inner child and to build a strong adult, inner adult. So what was the change after you came to China with this experience?
So the developmental experience of just losing, really, really losing that parental love basically from both parents. Okay, yeah, it gave me that physical separation, and that was I suppose that was a huge relief, where I didn't have to feel responsible in any way, I suppose, to my parents. Whereas, like, I still feel that responsibility to my mother, especially, and again to my older brother as well, who both legally classed in the UK, legally are classed as disabled. They haven't worked my brother has never worked in his life, and again, a lot of love, a lot of emotions for the both of them, and yeah, it's a little bit too much for me to hold on to. In the same way that you want to help you want to help, an injured person, say, on the road. Otherwise, just having that really deep connection and wanting to help and wanting to do something a little bit better. And again, it's simply, come on, it's 9,000 kilometers of separation. If I'm and luckily the environment here, I'm distracted enough. I can distract myself just about, where I'm not thinking of that overwhelming responsibility that I've made for set for myself. And again, that's basically, has been like my driving force, I suppose, for pretty much all of my adult life. No matter how much I've been trying to run away from it, been trying to hide from it, I'm still trying to say, like, I want to do something better, not just for myself, but also for them. Yeah.
I wondered, have you ever heard of family constellation?
Constellation.
This is so-called Bert Hellinger's method, family constellation.
Go on, describe it to me.
Briefly describing, this is a moment where you are in so-called field. It can be represented by the specific space. So, for example, we are in this space, but it's of course better to have it bigger because you involve more people to show the constellation. And usually in this family constellation, you are setting the family issues, or like the mother's side, father's side, so then men line or women line, depending if you are a son. So usually you focus on the father's side to get more strength from father's side, or if you have query, like your mother has bipolar, but this was not every day, it just came in some time, you can also check through this family constellation why it came to your mother and what is the process. Maybe you cannot heal her physically, but you can start the process which will eventually help you. And later, maybe if there is sometimes miracle, it happens, it can also help your mother.
Okay. So in this case, when you say constellation, like I'm thinking of like, oh, you mean star constellation? Okay, family therapy.
Yeah.
It's okay.
But this is not like you bring all your family there. It is like you, for example, come with me.
Like a meditation instead of
No. Also, that is good that maybe I touch this topic because for you guys also I'll give explanation of like visual one for Mike and audio one for you. So imagine you come to the meeting where 20 people in a big classroom, let's say. And now I'll place the cups showing, for example, this is you. This is someone from a group who, let's say, represents your father. This is someone from a group who, let's say, represents your mother. This is, for example, someone from a group, random person, who represents, for example, bipolar. And let's say this is you, father, mother, bipolar.
So I get this.
So the constellation is people, they feel the energy where to set themselves in the space, which is limited by the person who conducts the family constellation. And later, those people who find themselves in the specific location, the conductor asks question, for example, what do you feel? What is like a thought coming to you? And you ask this question to each of these people. And for example, you can ask question to bipolar person, why you stand between mother and father? And that person later replies, oh, because this is it and that. I just do imagination of idea how it looks like. It doesn't need to relate. But usually this is how it works when you have people involved in family constellation.
And in this case, people in the group otherwise are going to act as...
They act. I mean, in the group, it is important that you are so-called representative. So, for example, I am with you on this constellation, and I am chosen to represent you. When I come to the field, I describe my, let's say, feelings. Okay, it's so heavy, or I feel anxiety, or I need to lay down on the floor. And later, the conductor reads this message, what it's like, and give the feedback. So for you, audience, I hope somehow, if this is also very first time for you to hear about family constellation, I hope it gave you any kind of hint what it's like. And dropping to the final questions, 2 final questions for you. First question, what would you like to say to the past Mike? And what would you like to say to the future Mike?
It's difficult for me again to respond to this question as okay. So the whole modern language of mindfulness is, well, there is only now, there's only the here and now. Oh, sorry, but again, that all came from. I choose to hear that. I choose to take that phrase from, direct from the source, and that's all the Stoics. So can I talk to my past self? I can visualize it in the same way that I suppose I can visualize and act out basically a conversation between different aspects of my family, I suppose, with people acting in place of them. I can visualize it. I can write something. I can make a piece of music communicating to my past self. Can I physically do it? No, I suppose. So what would I say to my past self? It's very, very difficult for me to say, because again, I'm focusing on that very, very logical answer. The same is true, obviously, for my future self. Maybe just something as simple as just like, it's all right, keep going. It's all right, just keep going. Like no matter how difficult you think it is, no matter how bloody difficult it is, like you've got the answer.
And the last question: what is the sentence would you like to quote and like to send it to people?
To do whatever, whether you're sitting there like on the flipping toilet listening to this, or you're in there and you're in your office or whatever. There's no need to constantly doubting yourself and questioning, like, is this the right thing? Is this the right thing? And such. Whatever it is that you're doing, you have to just turn around and say, if you're not quite there yet, where you can just be like, yep, this is the right thing. Build that story for yourself. Build the narrative. You have to build it for yourself, because there's nobody else can come along and just give you all the answers. You do have to do that final little legwork of, that 10, 15%, that 20% basically. Yeah, you might, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Sure, you might have gotten up to basically your friends, the third stage of the hierarchy, but then that last little 10, 20% basically to achieve, I believe what I believe, and yeah, sometimes it's difficult, but.
Thank you, audience, for listening. I hope even through the pain, sometimes you see not always turning points are vivid and colorful. Sometimes it comes from the pain. I hope even this one can help you to get you from the bottom you are and to see that you can do it and you can keep going. Thank you, Mike.
Tak więc, kochani, dziękuję Wam za wysłuchanie dzisiejszej audycji. Mam nadzieję, że historia
Majka
była dla Was inspirująca. Oczywiście czekam na Wasze komentarze. A tymczasem słyszymy się w następnym odcinku audycji Punkt Zwrotny. Trzymajcie się. Pozytywnych wibracji. Cześć.